Hello everyone, this is Professor Puny Army, Chief Information Officer of Clan Oni, here with Part 4 of the Kilo Report. Now, I'm actually going to preface this a little bit because some of these blueprints that I'm going to be talking about, I changed rather drastically their original purpose, and I'll explain that when I get to these blueprints, but when I look at a blueprint, I decide on which video it's going into based upon the optic it has, or if it has no optic, it pretty much automatically goes here in the close range blueprint video, and you'll see this consistently throughout future weapons. Now, normally this wouldn't really be a problem. It makes some sense. After all, if a gun is equipped with a sniper scope, that means it was designed to be used at the long range. The problem is that the attachments don't necessarily reflect or work specifically in that direction, and I'm going to actually be doing sort of a compare and contrast later on in the video that will really exemplify what I'm talking about. You'll understand more as you hear about specific blueprints, but to start with, we're going to go right into the Chronicle, and I'm going to give a second mild forward here on underbarrel secondary weapons, which is what I call them. You'll notice the Chronicle and its extremely close relative, the Silent Stalker, both have the HE underbarrel grenade launcher, and you will recall that neither the long-range Kilo blueprint nor the medium-range Kilo blueprints had any kind of underbarrel secondary weapons. The primary reason for this is because underbarrel secondary weapons fire off their grenades at either too slow of a speed to matter at the medium range, or alternatively, they require you aiming pretty high up in order to get it over there, and even then, again, that slow speed really kills its ability to be accurate at the medium range. If you hit somebody with a grenade launcher at medium range, it's basically through luck, or they're camping, one or the other. With that out of the way, the reason why you don't see them too often is because even though they can be very effective if used right, they also reduce ADS and move speed, which a lot of close-range builds are trying to prioritize, not take away from. So as a result, underbarrel secondary weapons have quite accidentally become rather unpopular, although I suspect that certain types could be used more if people were more aware of them, and you'll hear more and more about these as these videos go on. Now, I'm going to mostly be talking about the Silent Stalker here because I prefer it a little bit more, again, because it has no stock rather than close quarters stock, which allows it to move at its original speeds despite the HE underbarrel grenade launcher attached to it. So the Silent Stalker, and by extension the Chronicle, were really good at pushing objectives and taking objectives very reliably. That grenade launcher really came in handy clearing out a point before you got there, and then, because of the incredible recoil control of the Kilo, actually performed decently well at the medium range as long as your target contrasted sharply enough with the background that you could easily see them. That's really the only problem with closer range optics such as these guns have, is that if somebody starts shooting at you from long range, it's kind of hard to get a bead on them if they don't contrast sharply enough with their background. So, but in objective modes where you're really going for the push and you're really aggressive, that's much less of a problem. In TDM and Kill Confirmed, if you prefer those modes, the grenade launcher was very effective at clearing out potential or actual campers in popular camping locations, and we all know a lot of these locations. I mean, if you play TDM or Kill Confirmed often enough, you're going to know, generally speaking, where people are going to be hiding, camping, and lurking around, so the underbarrel grenade launcher came in quite handy there. If for some bizarre reason you're going to be taking this onto, say, Warzone or Ground War, first off, you're insane. Well, Ground War makes more sense because you can actually push and take objectives there, but these still aren't the ways I would play the Kilo for that. If you were going to be taking a close-range Kilo into Ground War, you would want a hybrid medium to close-range optic, and maybe do a couple of other things, but I can understand if you took these into Ground War that there is a purpose there. The only real problem with that specifically being that these really, at least the Chronicle doesn't really move fast enough for that to work, and the muzzle brake does help with medium range engagements, not really in close range so much. Overall, these blueprints were really effective, mostly in the smaller map modes. Again, I wouldn't really take them into anything large, it just doesn't generally work, but these worked much better than I expected them to. Again, the Silent Stalker I preferred a little bit more, even though it was a little bit harder to control it, but if you practice with Kilo enough, the drop and recoil control doesn't really matter. But I would say that both of these were a great time. This is to contrast with the Striking Tiger. which looks really beautiful, and for those of you who don't know, those flowers overlay the camo, not lie beneath it, so the flowers remain even if you put a camo on it. But if you look at the attachments, you'll understand why I have a problem with this blueprint. First off, what is the point of suppressing your gun if you're going to be putting a bright green laser that will announce your presence? Second off, if you're using the iron sights of a gun, there is absolutely no reason you need aiming stability, and the tactical foregrip is therefore useless. If you were to be trying to use this blueprint for its visuals and you wanted to play it pretty seriously, or at least effectively, I would swap the 1 megawatt laser with... I would swap the 5 megawatt laser with the 1 megawatt laser, and I would swap the tag foregrip with the Merc foregrip, and you would have a much better time playing this blueprint. So this is mostly a visual choice. If you choose to use the Striking Tiger, it's most likely for the visuals. It's not because this particular combination of attachments works really well. The 50 round mags does make it a little bit unusually more effective in ground war and the Battle Royale Warzone. But I had a total mental block there for some reason. But the problem with that is, again, it is pulling away from your movement speed a little bit and your ADS speed a little bit. I personally prefer sleight of hand on closer range builds. That's kind of a me thing, although a number of closer range players will agree with me and they know why. It's all about that speed. But it is okay. It definitely requires some decent work if you're going to make this into a pretty serious gun. And then we come across my least favorite blueprint out of all the Kilo blueprints I tested, the Grand Marshal. The reason why is because it uses a close-range optic despite the fact that the rest of its attachments are clearly designed for medium to long-range engagements. This meant that in the theoretic environment in which it's supposed to be used, which is the close range, it basically was useless, since the Kilo has really bad damage output and no close-range benefits from any of these attachments. It basically just got me killed every time I got into the medium range. The close range, but whenever I went and tried to kill people at the medium range, the optic was so zoomed out that unless there was enough contrast for me to easily see the target and the target was not hiding behind some form of cover, I wasn't going to kill them. Any amount of cover will save somebody from the Grand Marshal. Does that mean you cannot rework it into a more effective build? No. You still can. Swap the optic for a medium range, put on either the rubberized grip tape or swap the muzzle brake for compensator or a slightly extended barrel, and you're going to be much better off. There's a couple of different things you can do to this build to make it more effective, but at its default, frustrating would be the word I would use here. Now, the next two blueprints I'm going to kind of combine again, Union Black and Berliner, because they are basically at their core, with all attachments removed, identical. They have the duct tape over the grip, black for Union Black and tan for Berliner. They have a rubber band that holds the laser in place if you put a laser on. Again, tan for Berliner, black for Union Black. I'm mostly going to be talking about the Berliner because I'll actually be talking about both because they each have their pros and cons. The Union Black doesn't need the granulated grip tape because, again, we don't need aiming stability for iron sights, but otherwise the Union Black is fine. Contrast that with the Berliner, which has the 1 megawatt laser in no stock and 50 round mags. Personally, I have a mild preference for the Berliner because even though normally for a close range build you don't want extended mags, the no stock brings you back up to the speed that you want at least to have minimally. Both blueprints work really well with the Merc foregrip for that hip fire and a little bit of extra recoil control to manage decent medium range fighting if you can get your eyes on a decent target. And really, this is what the Striking Tiger should have been, in all honesty. That's all really I can say about these. These are very stock, basic, close range, stealth Kilo builds. Pretty effective. Berliner is a little bit better for my personal way. I actually straight up rushed, which was really refreshing for me. I don't normally play rush style, but the Berliner pulled it off quite nicely. With that being said, then we come to the battle tested, and I'm actually going to throw the Kilobyte in here as a kind of addendum similar enough to the battle tested, because they both basically suffered from the same issue of being designed for a medium to long range engagement and not having a scope for it. Actually, if you paid attention when I was showing you the blueprints, the Kilobyte is just the battle-tested without the Sniper Pro stock. So if you want to have a little bit more leeway with your build, then I would personally recommend the Kilobyte, but the battle-tested looks nicer with those wood accents, so I would probably go for that any day of the week. Essentially speaking, for both of these guns, I'm going to be completely honest, I cheated quite a bit and put on a medium-range scope for these rather than leaving it the iron sights, because the optic was empty and they had a spare slot from battle-tested, so I just went on ahead and did it. They operated very well after that. The default attempt at using it close range did terribly for the exact same reason the Grand Marshal was terrible at it. The attachments just didn't contribute to that playstyle. So if you're going to use one of these two blueprints, please put a medium range optic on it. Don't even go with a hybrid close range. Don't bother, because you're not going to get any benefit really out of any of these attachments for close range. Keep it medium range. Enjoy the wood accents of the battle-tested. The Kilobyte is basically a weaker battle-tested. My favorite blueprint with which to start building off of is actually this one here, the Fiorentino. I probably pronounced that wrong, I'm sorry. But the compensator, the Commando foregrip, and the close quarters stock is that almost holy trinity of kilo attachments where it performs at its peak, and the remaining two attachments you can use to customize it to your personal playstyle. If you play a little bit closer, maybe you want the 1 megawatt laser and the stippled grip tape. Maybe you play a little bit longer range, you want the granulated grip tape and the Scout Combat Optic, or the attack laser and Scout Combat Optic. There's all kinds of things you can do with the Fiorentino to customize it specifically to your playstyle while leaving the 3 original attachments on. It's a great leaping off point for any kilo build you care to build. This is where I would start. Having said that, and sung the praises of the Fiorentino enough, we now move on to the Grub and the Web Weaver, which were remarkably similar, so I'm going to actually sort of combine them here. Actually, well, yeah, they were kind of similar. Now you'll notice first off that for both of these blueprints, I don't actually own the blueprints. I chose not to purchase them because I don't like the design of them, that's a personal thing, but I did recreate them here. So, for the Grub, the main differences between the two of them is that the Grub has, first off, one more attachment. It chooses the muzzle brake and the Commando foregrip and the stippled grip tape, whereas the Web Weaver has the Whisper and the 5 megawatt laser. That famous combination. Now, I'm going to talk about the Web Weaver first, because it was my least favorite of the two. You'll see in the actual picture there's a Merc foregrip there. That's a leftover artifact from when I was planning out another build, completely unrelated, and for some reason the Merc foregrip showed up on this, which kind of works because I actually did wind up putting on the Merc foregrip onto the Web Weaver when I tested this, so it works out, but I still wouldn't recommend necessarily using Web Weaver as it starts out, because again, we have the famous 5 megawatt laser Whisper barrel combination that nobody likes. I also have a mild problem with the close quarters stock being used with the 100 round drums. If you're going to use the 100 round drums in a stealth kilo, you really need to be pulling the stock completely off of the kilo and run no stock. And again, I chose the Merc foregrip as the spare attachment here, my personal attachment here, because as a stealth closer range gun, it really could benefit from a little bit of recoil control, but mostly the hipfire accuracy. If you do choose to pull the close quarter stock off and put on no stock, then the recoil control from the Merc foregrip will really help counterbalance that, and it becomes a much more effective gun, especially if you swap the 5 megawatt laser with the 1 megawatt, which is a substantially better boost for it. This is basically the close range 100 round drum kilo blueprint, whereas the Grub is a little bit better designed for medium range, despite the fact that it doesn't have the scope for it. And if you wanted to play it that way, I would pull off the muzzle brake for a medium range scope. It's not a huge deal because, quite frankly, the Grub performs quite admirably overall. There is an excessive recoil stabilization, but again, you can pull off the muzzle brake. That's not really a huge problem. The issue I really have with both of these is that they are closer range. I would have liked to have seen a hybrid optic on these. at the very least, because if you're going to be bringing a 100-round drum into a situation, it's because you're expecting a large quantity of hostiles in a given area, and that only really happens in ground war. Or alternatively, you're expecting to need 100 shots for something, which typically happens in your average squad fight in Warzone if you're playing 4v4s. So, to not have a medium range to close range hybrid optic is kind of shooting yourself in the foot, because close range weapons don't really perform well either in ground war or Warzone. So it's kind of disappointing that neither of them had that. I could have put that onto the Web Weaver, but I chose not to because I just felt that it needed the Merc foregrip more, especially if you do take the no stock attachment, and then you're really going to need that recoil control. But that's about all I have to say on closer range kilos. The next video, the 5th part of this series and the final part of the kilo report, is going to be running through the numbers of the kilo, how many shots it takes to kill, its range, etc., and also some specific recommendations for builds for specific purposes: objective play, long play, rush, etc. I decided to warn you ahead of time for this specific video so you would at least know how the series of each particular weapon, including this one, is going to end, and this is roughly the format of all of the series that I'm going to be doing on all of the guns. So you have a better idea of how it's going to go. So that is what you can look forward to next time. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching and or listening, and have a great 24 hours.